now give the floor to His Excellency Abdoulaye Diop, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Mali.
Monsieur le Président.
President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Secretary General of the United Nations, it is a great honor for me to address the cordial greetings of His Excellency Colonel Assimi Goïta, Transitional President and Head of State of Mali, on behalf of the whole of the Malian people. I am speaking from this rostrum also on behalf of His Excellency the Brigadier General Adoma Chami, President of the National Council for Safeguarding Our Homeland, Head of State of Niger, who has been prevented from speaking here. At the outset, I should like to renew the condolences of the people and authorities of Malawi to the authorities and people of Morocco, Libya, Turkey and Syria, following the natural disasters which have hit these kindred countries. President, peace and security remain the priority for the people of Mali and the Sahel. After over a decade of violence with particularly devastating effects. However, this region was known as a haven of peace, social cohesion, and coexistence between its communities. For its part, Mali has decided to carry out a paradigm shift and take its fate into its own hands. In security terms, therefore, Mali has prioritized capacity building of our security and defense forces so as to allow them to acquit themselves of their sovereign mission of defending our national territory and protecting the people and goods. The Malian people has now resumed greater trust and confidence in its defense forces. The people of Mali are encouraged by the results in combating the terrorist armed groups and their foreign state sponsors. Mali denounces, once again, with great force, the interference of certain powers who continue to facilitate the criminal activities of terrorist armed groups in Mali and in the Sahel. I wish to recall that on the 15th of August 2022, the government of Mali had alerted the United Nations Security Council to hostile acts and aggressions by France. Rather than ceasing such actions, this country, a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, continues with full impunity its destabilizing maneuvers in Mali and the Sahel, as is attested to by the recent liberation of terrorists in the tri-border zone of Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, outside any kind of judicial framework and unknown to the states concerned, to perpetrate further actions and terrorism against our civilian people and our defense and security forces. The hostile acts by France are also shown in their illegal and inopportune actions to prevent the treatment of our requests for financing in a number of financial institutions of a sub-regional, regional and even international nature. Likewise, it is regrettable that this same country, France, attempts and sometimes even manages, unfortunately, to instrumentalize regional African organizations, pitting brotherly countries against each other, merely for their geopolitical interests in a neo-colonial and paternalistic attitude. President, Mali is aware of the fact that military action alone cannot sustainably eradicate the complex challenges linked to terrorism and certain problems linked to the governance of the country. This is why the government has endowed itself with an integrated strategy, including political and institutional reform, development, specific concerns for youth, women, including employment, and their representation in decision-making bodies at local and national levels. To put the conditions in place allowing us to achieve the deepest aspirations of the Malian people for change, the government has committed itself to implementing political and institutional reforms which will be necessary for the reorganization of the state. In this dynamic, the 18th of June 2023 organization of referendum of a new constitution in Mali was adopted at over 96%, and this is participating in this effect. Its promulgation by the head of state on the 18th of July 2023 means the beginning of the Fourth Republic in Mali. With this landmark, we show our true determination to ensure a return to constitutional order which is peaceful and secure, including the organization in the upcoming months of general elections. President, after 10 years of presence in our country, the international response to the security challenges in Mali has not been commensurate to the threats. The expectations of the Malian people, expressed so many times by the authorities, have therefore often been ignored. The United Nations mission in Mali, MINUSMA, has not been able to help Mali to re-establish its authority over the whole of its territory. Despite the considerable investment over the last 10 years, during its presence on our national territory, the security situation has unfortunately only deteriorated further. The insecurity which was cantoned into northern areas of Mali at the time of the deployment of the United Nations mission in 2013 has now reached the centre and the south. This spread of insecurity, fortunately, is now being countered thanks to the undeniable successes on the ground by the Malian armed forces, despite the challenges inherent to this kind of operation. Despite the difficulties encountered by MINUSMA, due to the fact that the mission was not adapted to the security context, that is, peacekeeping in an environment where there is no peace to be kept, the Malian government accommodated itself, nevertheless, to the passive presence of the mission. However, it had become unacceptable for the government of Mali to allow MINUSMA to continue to become a part of the problem by aggravating tensions between our communities through the instrumentalization of the question of human rights for political ends, thus using agendas external to and belonging to countries which are hostile to Mali. It was after a comprehensive assessment that the government of Mali therefore decided in June, or requested in June 2023, that there be the withdrawal of MINUSMA, and we are pleased that the Security Council of the United Nations accepted our request. The government of Mali is working with MINUSMA on its orderly, coordinated and safe withdrawal by the 31st of December 2023. Pursuant to the relevant provisions of Resolution 2690, adopted on the 30th of June 2023 by the Security Council. The government of the Republic of Mali does not envisage prolonging this deadline, extending this deadline. We would like to reassure the Malian people and the international community that all provisions are being made to ensure the continuity of state services after MINUSMA's departure. The first phase of the withdrawal process is finished, and the second phase is already underway. MINUSMA has not been able to fulfill its mandate, that is true, but the government and Malian people remain grateful for the efforts and sacrifices made over the last 10 years in Mali. And I here pay tribute to the memory of all the victims, both civilian and military, both Malian and foreign, who fell honorably in Mali. MINUSMA's withdrawal does not, however, mean the end of cooperation between Mali and the United Nations. Quite the contrary. My country is very much attached to its membership of the United Nations, and the government remains committed to the noble principles and ideals of the Charter. Likewise, Mali renews its commitment to cooperate with all of the states in the world who so wish and who respect the fundamental principles of my country's foreign policy. In a dynamic of national ownership, we wish to continue the efficient implementation and intelligent implementation of the Agreement for Peace and Reconciliation resulting from the Algiers process, alongside our brothers in the signatory bodies who so wish. We welcome the progress made since the signature of this agreement in 2015, including the adoption of the new constitution, which takes on a number of the provisions of the agreement, and the government has decided to prioritize inter-Malian dialogue. So in the future, so as to further progress the peace process with signatory bodies. We are aware of challenges along the way to peace, like the macabre series of terrorist attacks carried out undiscerningly against civilians, where elements of the defense forces and security forces of Mali were affected. The attacks, the barbarous attacks against the Timbuktu vessel, and attacks on camps and towns in Bamba, Gao, and Burem between the 7th and 12th of September last are illustrative of the cruelty of this terrorist and criminal groups in organized gangs who attack targets in a cowardly way, such as women and children. On behalf of the head of state of Mali, the government and the Malian people, I wish to thank all friendly nations and international organizations who have manifested their compassion and solidarity following these tragic events.
Toutefois, il est
Having said that, it is regrettable that even faced with such tragic events, and at a time where the topic of our session calls on us to show greater solidarity, it is regrettable that the UN Security Council has failed to attain the minimum consensus to find the means to denounce these barbarous acts. Despite these difficulties, or rather because of these difficulties, the government of the Republic of Mali is more committed than ever to ensuring its sovereignty and its authority, and to extend all of our authority throughout national territory. The obscurantist and offensive forces will be opposed to the security forces. Security forces will prevail and eliminate them. That was the case recently in Burem, where our valiant soldiers pushed back an attack by this obscurantist criminal group, inflicting substantial losses. While extending the presence and authority of the state has also aims to liberate all of the areas formerly under MINUSMA. We are acting in conformity with all UN texts, and in no way are our actions an act of belligerence against the signatory movements. Quite the contrary. We are continuing to extend a hand to our brothers, the signatories, to ensure sustainable peace and harmonious development for our nation. So we call upon the armed groups to stop their collusion with armed terrorist groups during recent attacks, and to do so pursuant to the peace agreement and the various relevant UN Security Council resolutions. In the current geopolitical context, Mali does not want to be a theater of confrontation or competition for foreign geopolitical interests. Yet we stand ready to engage in cooperation with all partners that respect our sovereignty and our choice of partners, and also in the interests of the Malian people. President, as for the regional and international situation, Mali is closely following recent developments in Africa and in the rest of the world. As for global governance, the government of the Republic of Mali reiterates its commitment to the respect for the Charter of the United Nations, especially respect for the sovereign equality of states. And hence, we reject the policy of certain states to exercise neo-colonial dominion and to subject other peoples and nations. We deplore that we believe that, simply put, geopolitical interests are at stake while ignoring the aspirations of the peoples concerned in the recent regime changes. In this regard, we denounce and reject the double standards that are exercised by certain powers and certain regional organizations, and even by certain international organizations, including by the United Nations. This incoherence and this instrumentalization can only sap the credibility of our organization in the eyes of the population and in public opinion, eroding their trust in these institutions, which are now perceived as having departed from their primary function. Some of these organizations are used beyond any legal framework. They're being used as weapons against countries and populations that endorse them freely and sometimes undertook a transfer of sovereignty. These organizations are therefore being transformed into an organization that perpetuates the colonialist and hegemonic order. We are closely tracking the situation in Niger as well. Since the 26th of July 2023, the people and government of Mali reiterates their support, total support to the government and people of Niger, which is a kindred country, a neighboring country, and a friendly country. We denounce the principle of imposing sanctions and coercive measures against another nation, be that nation in Africa or elsewhere. We also denounce these actions, in particular when they're just, illegal, and inhuman, as is the case with what ECOWAS did in imposing sanctions against Niger, and with respect to the sanctions that were imposed against my country as well. The inhuman consequences of these sanctions are dramatic. I'm thinking of the sanctions in Niger that the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs said to ECOWAS. He sent a letter to ECOWAS on the need to alleviate these measures. I want to recall that even in the case of Iraq, a humanitarian corridor was opened in order to provide the Iraqi people with what they needed. These are organizations founded on solidarity and fraternity, and they should not be used to punish one's own brothers, one's own people, prohibiting them from obtaining food and medications. Furthermore, Mali remains firmly opposed to any military intervention by ECOWAS, which would have disastrous consequences for Niger, but for the whole of the region as well. Any military intervention in Niger, or any aggression, any invasion of that country, would pose a direct threat to the peace and security of Mali, but also to the peace and security of the region. And it would necessarily entail grave consequences. We will not stand idly by. One should not repeat the serious errors of the recent past. In 2011, through the firm opposition and warning of African leaders, the United Nations Security Council decided, regrettably, to authorize a NATO intervention into Libya. The consequences of that operation violently destabilized this kindred country and the entire region. This war of NATO in Libya is at the origin of the expansion of terrorism and violent extremism throughout the Sahel region, with its innocent victims and destruction that have ensued. This is why we will never stop reiterating the international responsibility for this human tragedy, which is undergone by Libya and by the people of the Sahel since that intervention. Therefore, on behalf of all the victims of 2011 up until today, the tens of thousands of dead, the millions of displaced peoples and refugees, we call for justice, we call for reparations. But above all, we ask for the international community to shoulder its responsibility and to draw the full consequences of this hazardous military intervention by third-party countries. It is crucial to avoid reproducing in Niger the errors committed in Libya, the errors that caused the degradation of the entire Sahel region, including in Burkina Faso, Mali, and in Niger. This is essential to reestablish trust among nations, which is aligned with the theme of our session. The many international challenges to peace and security call for Security Council institutional reform, rather United Nations reform. Mali reiterates its support to the legitimate demand of the African continent, the demand for Security Council reform, in order to make it more representative of the realities of our time. Likewise, Mali will continue to advocate for changes in economic, financial, and political global governance mechanisms to craft ideal, fair conditions for the participation by our country in multilateral institutions. In this regard, Mali reiterates the central role that Africa needs to play among the international organizations and nations. In this regard, we hail the opening of the BRICS alliance. We welcome the fact that they've included Africa in that as well. BRICS and the upcoming bank offers important opportunities for the development of the Global South. Along the same lines, the opening of the G20 to the African Union is an important signal. It's important for Africa's participation in other international fora intensify in the name of justice and equity. Climate change poses a genuine threat to present and future generations. We must be bold enough to move beyond dogmatism and short-sighted interests when it comes to this problem. In this regard, the time has come to effectively implement the decisions of our summits and of our COPs. It is important for states that were responsible for climate change assume their full, complete responsibility, including by supporting the efforts of the countries of the South to ensure their own development. President, I wish to recall that the United Nations was created in 1945, as you well know, essentially to spare succeeding generations from the scourge of war. This is our goal enshrined in the UN Charter, and it is far from a reality. Even more, current geopolitical tensions and many conflicts in the world are causing true concern for multilateralism, for peaceful coexistence, and harmonious development. Making a pause in the rhetoric of intimidations and threats and war, as the theme of the 70th session invites us to do, we need to work together to reestablish confidence in global solidarity. We need to dare to undertake reforms that will craft a world where everyone counts, where no one is left behind, where we all work together to put in place effective international mechanisms that are fair, effective, and inclusive, that can tackle crises instead of perpetuating those crises. Victims of meddling in their internal affairs, the people of Mali and several states of the Sahel unfortunately continue to live out the tragic consequences of the multi-dimensional crises caused and perpetuated by those who paradoxically are giving lectures about democracy or the respect for human rights. When it comes to the implementation of the head of state for the transition in Mali, that is eliminating all neo-colonial interference. And the Republic of Mali counts on sincere partners, those countries that value relations on equal footing and with equal respect. In this regard, I wish to make special mention of the Russian Federation for its solidarity and for its faithful commitment both multilaterally and bilaterally. Mali will remain committed to bolster regional mechanisms and sub-regional mechanisms in Africa as well, which defend as a priority the interests of the African people. We are faithful to our Pan-African vocation, which is reaffirmed in all of our successive constitutions. Therefore, we reiterate our adherence to all relevant collective security mechanisms, especially with regard to African leadership, and we also reaffirm this point. This is the full meaning behind the creation on the 16th of September of 2023 of an alliance of the Sahel nations of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger by the signing of a charter. This organization aims to establish a collective defense architecture and architecture of mutual defense to counter any form of aggression, terrorism, or transnational organized crime in the space of the alliance. This new organization also has the ambition of bringing together the efforts of these three countries in the socioeconomic and monetary realm, but also to strengthen a new basis for regional integration. This time, it will be an integration of the people, grounded in solidarity, in respect for dignity, in the identity of our peoples and our countries, and the affirmation of our sovereignty over our land and resources, but also our sovereignty over our organizations, the financing of our activities through our own resources, and also prevention of hegemonic and neo-colonial domination. Beyond security cooperation, Mali fully endorses the African initiatives that work to promote and increase bonds of fraternity and solidarity throughout the African Political Alliance, initiated by the sister republic of Togo, which aspires to achieve an independent Africa that is politically strong, that is non-aligned, and can participate on equal footing in global governance. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I wish to observe that the many challenges in the way of peace, security, and development require a multilateral framework that is adapted and recast. We cannot continue to do what we've been doing before, using the same mechanisms, the same institutions which have failed to adapt while expecting a new outcome. For its part, Mali remains committed to multilateralism where each nation counts, a multinationalism with solidarity that offers ambitious solutions to the complex challenges facing our time, especially in the Sahel. A open multilateralism which takes into account the deep aspirations of our population to change, dignity, and respect for sovereign equality of states, equity, justice, development, security, and finally, peace. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Mali.